Yvonne, Israel declined to send its team to Cairo yesterday, and that has set the negotiations back somewhat. The sticking point arose late, and it's based on an Israeli demand that Hamas supply an updated list of the living hostages and their conditions. So at the moment it looks like those talks are not progressing. This demand, apparently, according to the Israeli reporting on it, came from the Prime Minister or from people close to the Prime Minister, and it's been criticised by other members of Israel's security cabinet, who say that the negotiations could have progressed without this. And I spoke to a seasoned hostage negotiator who dealt with Hamas for 17 years, and he said Hamas never provides updated information about the hostages in negotiations, and Israel would have known that. He said he views this as a delaying tactic by those within the Israeli government who don't want to make a deal. There is tension within the Israeli government between those who wish to continue the military campaign until Israel meets its goals of killing the Hamas leadership and securing control of all of the territory in Gaza, and those other ones within the government who want to prioritise the release of hostages. Over the weekend, I was on a briefing for reporters from senior officials within the White House, the US government, and they were saying that Israel had basically accepted a deal for a 6-week truce in exchange for the release of vulnerable hostages. And they were simply expected to nut out the final details of the prisoner and hostage exchange in Cairo this week, hoping to get that deal done before Sunday, when the Muslim holy month of Ramadan starts. It's possible that this could still progress, but the timeline has now been pushed back. The problem is going to be, getting Israel back to the table, getting Hamas to agree to the Israeli terms. Hamas says it's open to a deal. There's some conjecture about whether Hamas would accept a temporary truce for 6 weeks, so Ramadan plus another 2 weeks, or it wants a definitive end to the conflict. But most people associated with the talks say they're confident a deal can be reached. They've just got to get everybody in the same room.
Well, meanwhile, US Vice President Kamala Harris has called for an immediate ceasefire, making what appear to be the strongest comments yet by a US leader on Gaza. What has been the response to this?
Not much so far. Israel, they're hesitant to criticise the US. There was one reserve officer, a former senior officer in the Israeli military on radio. He said that essentially this reflects that the US has given Israel at various points in the conflict a window in which to conduct its operations within Gaza. And he said this is indicating, Harris's comments indicate that the window's closed. The US has run out of patience. It's going to start putting some firmer pressure on Israel to ease conditions inside Gaza. I think that's a pretty sound analysis. That's generally the consensus. I don't think you'll hear too much criticism of the US, apart from Israel rebutting, probably later today, rebutting some of those allegations that the Vice President made about Israel not letting aid into Gaza. Israel does reject that.
Well, patience is running out because UN experts are warning that famine is imminent in Gaza. What does this say about how bad the situation has become there since the start of this war?
Well, last week, Yvonne, there was a briefing to the Security Council from some of the agencies involved in the relief in Gaza. And for example, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the UN OCHA it's called, they said that there's 576,000 at catastrophic risk of deprivation and starvation. That's around a quarter of Gaza's population, and the area of greatest need being in the north, where there's been a difficulty providing any aid at all for the last month or so. The World Food Programme told the Security Council that famine was imminent. So I don't think anyone disputes the gravity of the situation, the severity of the conditions there. Israel says it is letting aid in. So the criticism from the UN, you heard from Kamala Harris and from aid groups, is that the aid is sitting on the border in Egypt, but Israel's not letting it through. Israel says that's not true. In fact, it even claimed there was excess capacity at some of the crossings. The problem is onerous inspections. There's been criticism of the Israeli inspection process. And also, you can just look at the figures. In January, there were 170 trucks going through into Gaza on average a day. In February, that number actually fell to 98. An aid group said on some days only a handful of trucks passed through the Israeli inspections and into Gaza. And once they get in, there's massive problems getting that aid to people because the coordination apparatus has broken down. The UN agencies that would normally deliver aid around Gaza, namely UNRWA, that's not functioning, particularly in the north. There's real difficulty because there's ongoing intense fighting around southern Gaza and in the centre of Gaza and continuing in some parts of the north as well. There's issues with the law and order breakdown. So Israel was actually killing some of the Hamas policemen that were accompanying the aid. So they're Gazan policemen, they were unarmed, and the UN said 9 of them were killed when they were accompanying aid convoys. Israel has also fired upon some of the aid convoys in certain incidents. So the UN was unable to deliver on some days and in fact stopped delivering for periods of time because its convoys were coming under Israeli fire. So these are the problems. Oh, and also there's armed gangs now, according to the US. There's armed gangs operating within Gaza that have been seizing aid. So all of this has complicated the delivery of distributing the small amount of aid that is getting through the crossings, and that's compounding the food shortages that are causing this imminent famine in parts of Gaza.
Well, some countries have resorted to airdropping food and aid into Gaza. How effective is this method of helping those in need?
Not very, according to pretty much everyone. Even the US acknowledges that it's not a solution. It's a response to the seriousness of the crisis. People pointing out that, that there are trucks sitting on the outside of Gaza with much more food than is able to be dropped along Gaza's coastline. So France, the US, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates and Egypt, they've all dropped aid, and there's plans to, in fact, bring aid by sea from Cyprus. The US is in talks about that. But really, all the solution that's being put forward by the United Nations, by aid groups, is to let more aid in through the crossings and to set up effective distribution mechanisms in Gaza. One aid group, Save the Children, called these airdrops nothing but theatre, saying they wouldn't make a meaningful difference to the suffering of people, particularly in the north of Gaza. So the key problems remain, and they're the ones I discussed with you. It's the difficulty of getting aid in and then the difficulty of distributing it, and none of the main players think that airdrops will make a material difference.
And Eric, just lastly, there has been condemnation surrounding the death of Palestinians last week scrambling for aid. What do we know about how they died? Because there have been conflicting reports.
So Israel said yesterday that it had completed a preliminary review of the incident in which at least 112 people were killed and the Palestinian Ministry of Health says around 700 injured. It said that it concluded that there was no Israeli strike on the convoy, that Israel was not responsible for the crush, and it said that most of the deaths occurred in what it called a stampede around the aid trucks. Now, witnesses prior to that release had contradicted the Israeli account, saying that Israel started shooting, and doctors in the hospitals which treated the patients said that the majority of patients they saw had bullet wounds, particularly to the upper body and to the head. So this remains in contention. Israeli officials have said they're confident they would be cleared by any investigation, that their troops were there simply to secure the passage of the aid, but the number of people and the desperation of those trying to seize the aid were the main cause of the problem. They've said that in a separate incident, a number of people approached an Israeli checkpoint and soldiers only fired into that group of people after firing warning shots. They said they responded in a limited manner. So the facts of this remain, I think, they remain contested. It's still not exactly clear what happened, but there are 2 alternate stories being told about who's responsible for those deaths.
Well, Eric, thanks for bringing us up to date. Eric Tlozek in Jerusalem there.